Hey, thanks for joining. So we are currently reading through the book of 1 Thessalonians. Paul, he wrote this letter to the church in Thessalonica, having been there for just a few weeks, and then he had to flee because these Jewish leaders, they stirred up a mob, and he had to flee the city. And we read about the time that he spent there, that the city, the world had been turned upside down by these guys who came into the city and preached the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this letter, it was written a couple of months later to these men and these women who are working out how to reorder their lives. They've come to know Jesus, they were going this way, and now they're trying to reorient their lives around this completely different set of priorities. And the theme that has struck me as we've gone through this, as we've read over the last 4 or 5 weeks of Paul's writings in this letter, is his love for these people that he just spent a few weeks with, and their love for one another. So in chapter 1, Paul talks to them about their labor of love. In chapter 2, verse 8, he says that him being affectionately desirous of them. He said, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become very dear to us. And then in chapter 3, verse 12, it says, may the Lord make you increase and abound in love for one another and for all. And so you see this theme of just the connection, like the familial relationship that Paul and Timothy and Silas had with the church here. And we see that today. And so I'm going to read 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 to 12. It says, now concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. For that indeed is what you are doing to all the brothers throughout Macedonia. But we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more, and to aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs and to work with your hands as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. So the start of this section, it says there's no need. That's what he says in verse 9. There's no need for us to write to you because you have been taught by God to love one another. And then he goes on to say, yeah, we urge you, brothers, to do this more and more. So it's kind of these two opposing statements where I don't even need to bother writing to you. Yeah, I am going to write to you, and I'm going to urge you to do it more and more. And often, when I think about this anyway, I think, oh, well, when someone's urging you to do something, to do something more and more, something different, they're saying something's gone wrong, or someone's done something bad, or we're just kind of heading in the wrong direction. Actually, no, I'm urging you to do this thing. Or maybe because we've missed the point slightly. But actually, we're taught here that they're doing a great job at loving one another. It says it's throughout Macedonia. It's not just in their city, but the entire region knows about this. Yet he's exhorting them, he's encouraging them, he's stirring them, whatever language we might choose to use. He's saying, we want to do this more and more, to be transformed more and more into who God has created us to be. Whether you've been following Jesus 40 years and life is going perfectly, things are all like a flowery and lovely at the moment, or whether you've been following Jesus just a few weeks and life is tough and you're just in the middle of it, actually Paul would urge us to be vigilant. Hebrews 3 puts it like this, says, take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. So we're called to urge one another, we're called to encourage one another, to make sure we don't head off down the wrong path. So whether you have been a Christian for years or weeks, we want to encourage one another, that we want to urge one another on to love more and more. And so it's worth asking that question today. How are we doing, as Paul was urging the Thessalonians, how are we doing at loving one another? Because in this passage, it's talking to the church. It's talking to those who are part of the family. Because it seems that there are some people in the church there that are taking advantage of the generosity of others. They're not pulling their weight. They're not working for themselves, but letting others do it for them. And now sometimes there are obviously mental health problems or physical health problems that mean we can't work, and so we need to rely on money. We can't from others. We can't provide for ourselves. But that's not what we're talking about today. That's not who Paul is talking to in this passage. He's talking to people who are being a drain on the community they're part of rather than investing into it. And that's the key thing here. These people, they're not investing into the community. It's as we put our money where our mouth is, that our passions are increased, that our engagement increases, whether that's the stock market, and where is you go from not putting money in the stock market to sudden investing, you're engaged. You want to know what's going on with the shares. You want to know what Wall Street is doing, what the FTSE is doing, because you've got money in it. Right? If you can see a football team playing in a park on a Saturday morning and you couldn't care less what the result is, but as soon as your son or your daughter's playing in that team, you're invested in the result of what's going on there. You want to know you're supporting the team because you've got skin in the game, you've got an active interest. And so in the things that we invest in, we are automatically more engaged, more passionate about, more interested in. And so if you find yourself in your friendship group and you're kind of like, yeah, I'm not that fussed about these guys. I'm not quite getting out of it what I used to. Or you're sitting here in church this morning, you're thinking, they didn't sing the songs that I don't really sing the songs that I want to sing, or they don't speak for the right length of time, or I'm not really feeling this. Or even with your family at home or with your work, when you go to work tomorrow morning, and you're sitting in a meeting, and you're thinking, I don't really want to be here. Can I challenge you to think, actually, how are you investing in those places? Or actually, have you kind of detached yourself? Have you thought, actually, I'm not investing? And obviously, that's going to lead to a more negative attitude towards things. It might even lead, like I just said before, but you're actually being a drain in that place. Man, can I encourage you to invest in those situations? Invest in your workplace. Invest here in church. Invest with your family. Invest with your friendship groups. Because that's what in Jeremiah 29, it tells us that we are to seek the welfare of the place that we live. We're to invest. We're to bring order from chaos, plant gardens, build homes, have families, create culture. We don't just sit around on our hands waiting for stuff to happen. We're called to work, whether we're retired or not, employed or unemployed, we're called to work. And that's why, interestingly, I think unemployment is obviously a financial problem, not being able to provide, but primarily it's a theological problem, because God, He's our creator God. He created us to work. Whether it's putting out cones on the roads of Worthing, or whether it's working in the hospital or in the schools, or collecting our recycle bins, or not actually at the moment, or raising your children in your home. We're called to be active. We're called to be praying and giving and loving. The list goes on. So I wonder, how are you doing with that? How are you doing it at loving more and more, at investing? I would suggest that if we want to do better with that, if we want to love more and more like Paul urges the Thessalonians, that it's possible for us this morning. If you want it, it's possible. It's available. Not through us working it up, though. Not through you thinking, well, I'm going to do this, and this better, and I can do better at this. Although obviously positive thinking can help, but rather it's ultimately going to be God at work in us. It's His Spirit in us that has changed me, and is going on changing me, that has changed you and going on changing you if you know Jesus. It's the word that Pete used last week called sanctification. He said God's will for us is His sanctification, the setting ourselves apart, becoming more and more holy. You can come to God this morning and say, God, I need your help. Help me, Father, to love more and more. Show me how to do it. Give me opportunities to do it. Please, God. And then in the next few verses, he goes on and just gives us some other help with this. He says, we should aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs and to work with your hands as we instructed you, so that you may walk properly before outsiders and be dependent on no one. You see, if you look a couple of pages on in 2 Thessalonians, we see part of the part of the problem they had in the church here is that there were some who were not being busy at work, but being busybodies. In verse 10, it says, "For even when we are with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies. Now such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and earn their own living." Right, so there's these people, they're not striving, or they're not aiming towards peace. They're not looking to bring peace to situations, but they're looking to bring trouble. They're being disruptive. They're being problematic to situations. And so when you think about, actually, if I'm going to get involved in this, that, or the other, our aim, when it talks about aspiring to live quietly, is, which these two counterintuitive kind of things, this ambition to live quietly, whereas ambition normally means we want some kind of significance, it means we want some kind of recognition, or we want to get somewhere. Actually, we're able to aspire to live quietly because what we're aspiring to bring, our ambition is to bring peace to situations, not to cause problems, not to make arguments and just throw our opinion in where it's not wanted. Our aim is to bring peace. Because there's this problem with idleness in the church. There's a problem with people not wanting to work. Paul would say work is good. We see that if you read through this letter, we see again and again Paul talks about how work is important, how he worked while he was among them. He didn't want to be a burden on anyone. But then the passage ends, and it says, so that you're not dependent on anyone. But the other reason is the reason I don't want us to miss, because it says, so that you may walk properly before outsiders. So it says all these things, to love one another more and more, to work, to aspire to live quietly and mind your own affairs, work with your hands, so that you may walk properly before outsiders. See, the way that we work, the way we do our jobs, the way we raise our families, whatever your work is a missional thing. It will speak to outsiders. It will speak to them. When we say outsiders, talking about those who don't follow Jesus, those who are not part of the church. Right? And maybe it's before they've even come into our space or had a conversation with you about what you believe. There's this link between how you work and what outsiders, their perception of the gospel. What does it look? What effect does Christianity have on these people's lives? What effect does it have on how they work, what they do with their time and their money? Because people who come looking in, and we want people to be coming into this space and looking in to see what we're doing here. They'll ask the question, okay, what does it look like? What are the indicators of someone who follows Jesus and how they do their job? And John Piper, who's an American Bible teacher, he would say that the way that we work has the opportunity to build bridges for the gospel. So when you go to work tomorrow, it's not just I'll get through my 9 to 5 or whatever your work pattern is, and I just want to get to the weekend and I live for the weekend. Actually, your 9 to 5, your Monday to Friday, is as important as your Saturday and Sunday, because it has the opportunity to speak of who Jesus is, of what he has done in your life, excuse me, and what he can do in the lives of others. It's a missional opportunity to build bridges for people to come to know Jesus, for them to come and experience what you have experienced in the gospel. And the way the Thessalonians responded to the gospel was so dramatic, it was so life-changing, that this whole region has heard about these Christians. Right? The transformation has been so powerful that it has built bridges for others to come to know Jesus. As their attitudes to work and to sex and to money and the poor and to human life, all of these things changed. And these people, the church has grown. More and more people have come to know Jesus. The whole world has been turned upside down because of this new king who's sitting on the throne. And because we haven't seen these dramatic situations, we haven't seen such changes in Worthing, in our situations, we can be frustrated, can't we? And if you're part of the church, I get that, and I feel that as well. But I also think there should be an excitement in us. It should make us excited. It should make us hungry to see the same thing happen in Worthing, on our roads, with our neighbours, in our communities. Don't we want to see that more and more? Because that's what the gospel is capable of. The gospel is capable of transforming a city, is capable of transforming a whole region where people are happily going in one direction, living for this and that, and then they encounter Jesus, they hear the good news of God, and they turn and they want to center their lives around a completely new set of priorities, around a God who will reign for eternity, who will be on the throne forever. The one who Isaiah says is a wonderful counselor, is a mighty God, is everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. This God is the God who loves us, who loves you and who loves me. Right? Me and you, we make mistakes and we sin and we rebel and we try and put other people and other things on the thrones of our lives. And yet Jesus, he came into our mess, into our dirt, into this polluted world, and he brought his light. He made the polluted things clean. Those who were grieving, he brought joy. Those who were bound up in captivity, he brought freedom. And we get to, and our response to that, our response to the incredible grace of God is not that we have to work something up in ourselves and think, well, I've got to work. It's what the Bible tells me to do, so I'm going to do this, this, and this, and tick the things off the list. No, we get to work because we have been rescued for relationship. And out of that relationship, our response is to worship. And one of the ways that we worship is how we work. And how we sing and how we give and how we do all of these things. They all come not out of a legalism, but out of the goodness of what God has done for us, so his grace at work in our lives. Our response is to worship, for our whole lives to be living sacrifices for him. There's nothing that we do to earn it. It's his grace. His grace is sufficient for me, is sufficient for you. Isn't that amazing? Let's worship.